A former DEA senior official has been indicted. The federal government now alleges he was working for the cartels. Journalist Max Blumenthal went to his home and joins us at the top of the show. Plus, MTG is taking swings on her way out of Congress. The firebrand lawmaker who wants to replace her is here with us. And President Trump has blasted Zelensky for being a barrier to peace. We've got another wild story from Chicago. It's all next in the Matt Gaetz Show. Let's do this. We're shaking up Washington, D.C. We're breaking the fever.
You ever watch this guy on television? It's like a machine. He's great. Matt Gaetz.
Tonight we bring you the story of lawmen breaking bad. One of Obama's top officials at the Drug Enforcement Administration decided to pick a side hustle up with the cartels, laundering money, doing drug deals, and even buying weapons for narcos. Meet Paul Campo, 25 years at the DEA, big badge, big resume. And the moment he retires, he allegedly starts working for the same drug-running psychopaths he spent decades pretending to fight. Campo and his partner, Robert Sensi, didn't just dabble in the petty stuff. They allegedly agreed to launder about $12 million in cartel cash. Most Americans can't get the IRS to answer the phone, but these two were allegedly converting cartel stacks into crypto like it was customer service day at Coinbase. Much of the focus following this indictment has been on the former DEA guy, Campo, but Sensi has some bizarre connections of his own. Was he in the CIA? Max Blumenthal is a journalist at Grayzone. He thinks so.
Robert Sensi is a veteran CIA operative whose involvement in CIA schemes goes all the way back to Reagan's October surprise, who has participated in multi-million-dollar frauds to allegedly, apparently, purchase military-grade helicopters for a certain Middle East country.
And it gets better. Prosecutors say they weren't just washing money. They allegedly helped arrange a payment tied to 220 kilos of blow. That's not a weekend in Aruba. That's enough to turn a small city into a snow globe. Then comes the weapons menu. Campo and Sensi allegedly talked about acquiring military-grade hardware for the Jalisco New Generation cartel. We're talking drones, explosives, the whole party pack. Meanwhile, the same cartel is officially designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Just imagine the nerve. U.S. taxpayers were funding this guy's pension while he was allegedly trying to up the drone game of the cartels. But here's the story just hits peak swamp. They weren't even talking to a real cartel boss. They fell for an undercover sting. I honestly can't tell what's worse, that a CIA guy and a DEA guy would team up against America, or that after all of their experience working at the highest levels of the U.S. government, they weren't even good enough to not get caught in an undercover sting. Now they're facing charges that range from money laundering to narco-terrorism conspiracy, charges that could land them in prison for life. And honestly, that's the least surprising part of this whole mess. Every time someone says the deep state isn't real, show them this. A top official at the DEA who allegedly turned traitor and used his training, taxpayer-funded training, to help cartels pump drugs, guns, explosives, and cash through American communities. This is what President Trump has been talking about for years. Corruption not at the edges, but right in the middle. Embedded, institutional, comfortable, from people whose names you don't even know. This is why there has to be a purge of the bureaucratic class, because when the people who are supposed to protect us end up helping the cartels breach from the inside, that's not incompetence, that's rot. And the only person who's actually shown he's willing to fumigate that rot, Trump. The cartels have enough firepower. They don't need help from Washington or former DEA officials, yet they got it anyway until someone finally turned the lights on. Joining us now, editor for the Grayzone News, Max Blumenthal. Max, you've traveled to the home of the former DEA official in this story. You've called out his co-defendant as a member of the CIA. What are the facts in this case that are most interesting to you?
Well, this is part of a larger program that the CIA semi-official or not unofficial historian Tim Weiner says goes back to 1947, in which the CIA has been involved in drug trafficking operations, bringing drugs into the United States. The journalist Jack Paulson from All Source Intelligence was first to call out the CIA connection of one of these two defendants who are alleged to have been involved in a $12 million conspiracy to launder money for the Jalisco New Generation cartel in Mexico. They are Paul Campo, whose home I visited. I would have shown his front door, which appeared to have been barged down by federal agents, but my kid was sitting in the car, so I couldn't get too far from the car. And he was the DEA official for many years in charge of finance, meaning he understood all of the vulnerabilities in the U.S. where in the U.S. financial system, where a cartel could launder money in real estate, cryptocurrency, and he was working with Robert Sensi, who is a CIA operative whose work goes back to the late 70s, 80s. He was a witness in the October surprise of Ronald Reagan, has been involved in financial fraud operations to procure military-grade helicopters for a certain Middle East country operating behind fronts. So he also had a lot of knowledge in how cartels could do this kind of work. And apparently, this pair was working together, and they were approached by the DEA today through a confidential informant who got them to agree to this scheme while they boasted about working on other schemes. I should also mention
By the way, that
this,
to me was one of the saddest parts, Max. Like the fact that guys who were supposed to be multi-decade veterans weren't even smart enough to sniff out the fact that it was a confidential informant. I would expect that if the cartels were picking up former DEA officials, they would at least be better at it than to get nabbed like this.
Yeah. These guys definitely were not up on their operational security. And this appears to have been going on for a long time. I mean, it raises questions about whether Campo was involved in these operations while in the DEA. I mean, we know about what was taking place in the Obama administration's DEA with the Fast and Furious operation, where an associate of Chapo Guzman alleged that the Obama administration's DEA had actually cut a deal with the Sinaloa cartel to give it kind of blanket immunity and arm it to take down other cartels inside Mexico, kind of like proxy warfare. But going back even further to the Reagan administration and the first Bush administration, before Hugo Chavez was in power in Venezuela, when Venezuela was a U.S. ally, the DEA and CIA recruited top members of Venezuela's National Guard to ship over 20 tons of cocaine into the United States so they could supposedly surveil the drug running routes inside the United States. The cocaine actually reached its destination. The CIA said, let the dope walk. That's according to the New York Times and 60 Minutes, a 60 Minutes 1993 report. Now, that cartel that the CIA created was called Cartel of the Suns, and it no longer exists, but it is being weaponized by the current Trump administration and its Department of Justice to label Venezuela a narco cartel or a narco-terror organization in order to justify regime change. But you're never allowed to know that the CIA actually created that cartel.
Well, CIA created a lot of the Islamic extremist organizations by funding those entities, going back to the Cold War. And so something can emerge out of a CIA creation and become something else and something different. And that very well may be what's going on in Latin America with the Cartel of the Suns. But when I saw this story, Max, I thought about the Charles McGonigal deal, where somebody who was running the counter intel desk in one of these field offices ends up bringing in some of the information on the Russia hoax, and then thereafter working for Oleg Deripaska, working for a Russian oligarch. I found that to be like similar in this way. Like, is the United States government really just training the next generation of talent for oligarchs, cartels, and bandits around the world?
Well, sure. I mean, this is kind of a way of lobbying where you work for the other side. But I mean, within the CIA, as you mentioned, the CIA has been recruiting jihadists for decades. The book sitting behind me, my book, The Management of Savagery, covers that whole dark history. And so you can look at the CIA cultivating the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to draw in the Russian Red Army and then weaken the Soviet Union. Then after the Soviet Union collapses and the Red Army leaves, the CIA's top operatives Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Burhanuddin Rabbani destroy Kabul. So then the Taliban comes in to stabilize the situation. Then the CIA trains new death squads to take out the Taliban after the U.S. invasion. And what just happened here in D.C.? A member of one of those CIA death squads randomly, or supposedly randomly, shoots two National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C. And we have to ask for evidence about all of these new claims about drug cartels to justify regime change. The Cartel of the Suns was not in the DEA report last year. However, the key trafficking routes to the United States are coming from U.S. allies like Daniel Noboa's Ecuador, where the president, Noboa, who is a billionaire, son of a billionaire, U.S. citizen, who was raised in Miami, ran the Noboa family shipping company, which is implicated in cocaine shipments where cocaine is transferred to Europe and the United States in bonita bananas. Anyone can look up these stories. This is happening all across the hemisphere, but mainly from the Pacific coast. Alvaro Uribe, another figure who was beloved in Washington, the Colombian president who was the key architect of Plan Colombia, friends with Joe Biden, friends with Lindsey Graham, very close to Marco Rubio. He was listed by the DEA as one of the world's top 100 narco traffickers because he was providing Pablo Escobar and his Medellin cartel with flight licenses when he was the head of civil aviation in Colombia.
Well, I think what you've seen in a lot of these Latin American countries is the leadership aligns with one of the groups of bandits against the other groups of bandits, and then it then purports to be a great bastion of narco-terrorism cleanup because they point to their enforcement actions against the competition of the people they sometimes align with.
Well, I mean, the U.S. supported the Taliban towards the end of the Clinton administration.
We're supporting them now. We're paying the Taliban tens of millions of dollars now. I don't think you have to look that far back. I do want to offer this as a sort of defense of the government. They would say, yeah, but we caught this guy. We were able to have a successful law enforcement action. What would you say to that?
Well, they did, and credit to them for cracking down on corruption. These are former officials who were obviously playing very loose and were really sloppy. At the same time, you had Emil Bove, who is one of the top pro-Trump, kind of pro-MAGA officials in the Justice Department. I think he's a federal judge now. He worked for years to indict one of the top accused narco-traffickers in the Western Hemisphere. I read the indictment. It's very detailed. It accuses this figure of institutionalizing his entire country's political system to profit from drug trafficking. His brother is currently in a Florida federal prison for 30 years for narco trafficking, was sending bags of cocaine into the U.S. with his initials on it. And this figure, Juan Orlando Hernandez, was just pardoned by the Trump administration, erasing Emil Bove and the Justice Department's hard work. So I really wonder how that went down and when the Trump administration will produce evidence that Hernandez was the victim of lawfare, as Trump says. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, that is a perfect segue, Max, because Juan Orlando Hernandez will be a guest on my program tomorrow night, and we will ask him. Max Blumenthal, editor for the Grayzone News, thank you so much for coming on the program and sharing your perspective.
Thanks a lot, Matt.